to the ReThink podcast, where we ramble and once in a while talk about something significant.
Yeah, what are we talking about today?
Acts chapter 17, verse 1 through 9.
Yep.
So you
Okay,
two,
so
you
fun
two,
fact.
you two were teaching this?
Yeah. So fun fact, whenever we were there in Thessaloniki,
Yep.
Greece.
yeah, I kept wanting to say Thessalonica,
Yep.
and I never knew why they had changed it. Well, it's because the letter K was omitted from the Greek alphabet for a while, and they didn't like it.
Interesting.
And then there was a whole bunch of people that really liked the letter K, and they protested and got the letter K put back in to
The Greek alphabet.
the Greek alphabet there, as far as how you pronunciate it with the K. So it went from Thessalonica back in the day of Paul to Thessaloniki.
Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon.
Look at you.
K.
Yeah, they didn't like it.
K.
So there you go. That's modern day Thessaloniki. Is
Reflecting back, what were you guys' thoughts on modern day Thessaloniki?
we had just come from Philippi.
Which was cool.
There was a lot to see there. Not first century stuff, but still early.
Well, some at the ancient site there was. Not at Kabbalah, but at the ancient site there was.
No. I specifically remember reading a plaque saying there's no first century
At
ruins
Philippi?
here. Yeah. Everything was second century or beyond.
Cancel all that stuff I did on my videos.
I know. I actually did a whole bunch of video talking about, like,
good thing we weren't
you know,
fact-checking.
this is where Paul walked and all this stuff, and then I
Like at the prison, they had to sign
know.
on it. This is where Paul was in.
I know, but
The
He
best
was.
video
He
that
was.
Blunker recorded that entire trip was when we were outside of the original prison. It was the one. And we're standing out there, and some tour group walks up. There's a lady, and I forget what language she's speaking. She's definitely with a group. Anyway, she's telling them about the potential prison site of Paul, and there's this dog standing there. Blunker grabs the camera, and he goes, "Well, we're outside the prison of Paul, and this is Paul's dog over my shoulder." And she was like, she was very concerned. She's like, "No, that's not right." And he was like, "Oh, okay." He's kept walking.
yeah, that was fun.
Oh,
yeah, I had
man.
really concerned that I was teaching.
That's kind of like when
So he was like stupid
Ben
Americans.
Farley at Philippi. We're talking about Lydia and
Yeah.
the purple,
Oh,
the
yeah.
dealer of purple. And he grabs a couple of cows
Who were wearing purple.
This is cloth they got from Lydia.
Yeah, that was awesome.
He
But
did-
yeah, so
he
we
did a lot of false theology videos
None of those have hit the
in
internet,
Greece.
to our knowledge.
But I'm not making fun of him.
Yeah. So
That's his
we had-
gift.
we had
We're not
just
making fun
come
of him.
from Philippi, where there was a lot to see, and yeah, it was really early stuff. But yeah, the sign did say there's no first century. I was very disappointed after I had spent like an hour doing video, and then I read the sign.
It's hard to tell sometimes because after a while, a rock that's 2,100 years
It
old
could have been
looks
there.
the same as a rock that's 2,000 years
Right,
old.
yeah.
Or 1,800. They don't look that much different.
So
We roll into Thessaloniki, and it's like modern city.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like it.
So I watched the drive-through history dude.
Yep. That's it.
It's Dave Stott.
Yeah, he did it better than we did it.
Duh.
He found some interesting
Really?
sites beyond what we found, but yeah,
It's
it
a
was
really good coffee.
It was all right.
I don't even remember it.
Yeah. What was it? The Agora? Is that where we were at? That's
So there's nothing there but stuff they've recently worked to remodel, so we weren't even allowed to see a lot of it.
right.
Then we did pay to go through a museum that was
Yeah.
Yeah, Steph and
biggest
I
element of it
didn't go through
was-
there.
they're wanting to know that the Nazi occupation and stuff of Greece was horrible experience for them at Thessaloniki. There was a lot about that. That's not the old stuff.
Yeah. But it's literally a city block. Because the entire new town was built on the old town, which was, that's a pretty common practice in
Yeah.
ancient world and
Well,
stuff.
there were
but-
tourists coming there to see where the old stuff when it was not that old of stuff.
right,
Yeah.
You know, if it's just previous generation, it's just like grandpa's stuff. Build on it.
right.
We all do that.
I remember Jeff bought some amazing cherries off the
I did,
street
right?
there.
That was good. And was
It was cherry season.
was it oranges or nectarines or something?
Oh, yeah, you got some
bought
of those,
something
too.
else too.
Nectarines.
Those were like the best part of Thessaloniki.
Street food is the way to go everywhere.
We went down the street to that old church.
The rotunda.
The rotunda.
How old was that? Because you got
That was
video on
311.
Pretty cool building.
Yeah, Byzantine
Awesome.
Empire, which is kind of cool because Thessaloniki it's an incredibly like important port city. It was the second most important city outside of Athens, and really even still today it
Still
holds
is.
that.
You can fly
because-
from Chicago to Thessaloniki.
Yeah, it's a very large metropolitan area, port city, all that stuff. So the fact that Christianity was thriving before the Roman Empire instituted it in 330 that's kind of a big deal.
Significant.
That it had that much impact from the time of Paul. And that's what we see here in Acts 17 is the fact that though there is opposition, the gospel lays the foundation for an incredible movement, not just for this one particular town, but really the world, because Thessaloniki is a port city and it's a transition point from Asia to Europe on
Yeah.
a global scale, even back in that day.
There's two rivers and two roads kind of came together there at the edge of the sea. So you got all of that. It's just naturally going to be a place of trade and influence. It's wealthy and important. One of the things that we did not find, but Dave Stott in Drive Through History does go to that site where there's a word that Luke uses to describe the governmental officials in Thessalonica called politarchs. And historians, for a long time, they could find that word nowhere else and thought that Luke had messed up, and skeptics were using that as a way to say, his history is not accurate. These stories are made up kind of things. But then archaeological excavation, found that there is an archway at the entrance along the road from that era. And there's the politarchs are mentioned, that word's used, and there's 7 guys listed there. So they were the ruling officials of Thessaloniki at the time that archway was created, which was the time that Paul's there. So I don't know, those kind of things we didn't find that, we didn't go to that spot, but that's significant in a small way. Again, we see the reliability of this story. Just in that one word usage. So
Another thing I think is really interesting about this town is it's part of the Roman Empire at this point, but it's considered what they call a free city. So if a city or a community did something great on the behalf of the Roman government or something like that, so a battle or something like that, sometimes they'd be granted an exemption from all Roman rule. So they were helped out and stuff and still guided by the Roman Empire, but they could set up their own type of government and stuff. And so Thessalonica was more Greek than it was Roman. And I think that's an interesting thing here because it's such an important city and was considered a free city.
But unlike Philippi, there was enough Jewish influence, at least presence there, to have a synagogue.
So 10 males.
At least 10. So it may not have been a large population even at that, but
and so with the synagogue too, we have a mixture of Gentiles because we hear about these God-fearers that are in this region, and that's something different than what we've seen back in Asia. And
so these are probably proselytes, people who are non-Jewish by
birth.
Yeah, biological, that have become converts to Judaism. Probably.
Yeah, but they probably haven't gone all the way.
Probably not.
That's the deal.
But they are believers they're believers in God. They're God-fearing.
Right. And
God-fearing Greeks is what Luke used to describe them.
Yeah. And so it says many of them. And so
Greek culture, I talked about this when I was preaching at Clay County. We talk about Greek mythology. Well, it wasn't mythology to them.
Yeah, it was real.
It was real. It was their belief system. So to step out of that and to be God-fearing, God-fearing is a big deal. I think it's interesting too that Luke throws in there's not just the Jews, the God-fearing Gentiles, but a few prominent women.
Yeah. So that's different than Roman culture, and this is where sometimes we get things mixed up, because Roman culture, like, women weren't necessarily highly valued, but in Greek culture, there was a whole class of prominent women that were wealthy, that could own stuff, and so we get it kind of mixed up sometimes, and they had actual influence in how things went. And so I think it's interesting Luke mentions that.
So he starts out this text by saying, as was his custom, Paul goes to the synagogue. I think there's so much to learn just from that understanding that they had a method, that this isn't just random bouncing down the road. Hey, let's stop at Thessaloniki and see what happens. There's a purpose to this. He goes through Amphipolis and Apollonia,
which we have a lion at Amphipolis.
Yeah, we've got some cool video from there. Because Paul would have seen that line. It was established, it's been too long now. I don't remember.
Alexander the Great dedicated it to one of his generals,
like
yeah. 350 BC.
So, but he didn't stop at those places. At least nothing's told to us about what happened there. Knowing these guys, if somebody would have said something, they'd share the gospel, right? But it seems like they're just on a journey. Kind of like when you go, if you're going to go to Denver, I know this from experience. You stop at Hayes, Kansas, because it's halfway.
Yep.
And so they pass through Hayes and go on to Denver. That's kind of seems like that's what's happening here, but that's part of their plan. Paul, time is limited, and he wants to change the world for the gospel. For the kingdom of God, and so he's going to Thessalonica because Thessalonica is a place of influence. I think that's important to note. There's a plan to this, and his plan is go to these places of influence and go to the people who already have an interest, where the soil is prepared, where when we look at this whole story, it's the Spirit that directs them here. So I think our perspective needs to be that he's going to places where the Spirit guides him to go, where the Spirit is preparing people to hear. That's not just something first century. That is something that if we learn to listen and look for God conversations, opportunities to share, we can do the same thing. There is a plan to this. Do you want to speak more into that? You're big on this mission plan.
No, not really.
Okay. Covered it perfectly.
You did.
So they shared the gospel, and there's followers.
So, okay, let's stop there, though, because whenever
I thought he wanted to share more. He wasn't satisfied, but he didn't want to say that perfectly. Think a minute.
Missionary methods that's exactly like, you're right. There's strategic points and everything, but when he goes into the synagogue, there's some key things that he does. He reasons with them,
right?
He explains to them, and then he proves to them. And those details, sometimes we just read over that.
Those words are different.
Yes, very much so. Because he doesn't go in and go, hey, you all are wrong, and, you're going to hell type deal. And sometimes we take this approach of we have it right, you don't have it right. Let me inform you how, you know what I'm saying? And we just blow people off, and it's a one-way conversation. What that tells us is he goes in with a posture of, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
Let's discuss this.
The word reasoning in particular.
Yeah. And let me show you why, and this is so important. He doesn't draw on his own experience to prove to them. He could have been like, yeah, I had this experience on this road to Damascus. Okay, great. But he goes to the scriptures it talks about, and he proves to them from God's word why Jesus is who he says he is. And I think that's an incredible lesson we have to apply to our own lives, is that our past experiences are not the authoritative measure in which we point people to Jesus. They are a part of our story of how God worked in our lives, but God's word is the truth we stand upon, and that's where we show people.
Right, so I can imagine him going in, because the Jewish teaching, they would have been anticipating a Messiah. They would have talked about those things. So I can imagine him going in and saying, hey guys, have you thought about Psalm 22 and what that really looks like? Because he talks about crucifixion there. Let me tell you what happened to this guy, Jesus in Jerusalem. Let's go to Isaiah 53. Let me read this for you. Let me tell you about one that I know about that this fits. He was born in Bethlehem. He's of Judah's line. He fits the genealogy, all those things that mattered to them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 300 plus prophecies of Jesus. And I can just see him taking his time and talking about, have you thought about this? Have you seen that? Does this bring up any interest to you?
Mm-hmm.
As he reasons back and forth and takes their questions. And, it's a dialogue. Those words are used on purpose.
Oh, yeah.
That's his method.
Yeah. So he does that for 3 Sabbaths. So we know he's there at least 3 weeks, but realistically, probably longer.
Yeah, and maybe that's just the 3 times he did that.
Right. Because in First Thessalonians, it talks about, we were glad to share the gospel with you, but also our lives.
Right.
And so this is not come to church on Sunday, let me tell you the gospel, and then you just go do your own thing. Like, he's living life with these people on a daily basis, and you better believe he's having these conversations with them.
So he's, because Thessalonians, which, by the way, he leaves Thessalonica and he goes down, he either sails or walks inland all the way, he goes to Athens, and then he goes to Corinth. Why is it Corinth? He sends Timothy
Yep.
back up to Thessalonica, checks on him. He comes back and says, oh, something's going on here. So Paul sends this letter of First Thessalonians back to them. So that's what we're referring to.
First Thessalonians is one of the earliest letters that we have that Paul...
Some people think it's probably the first.
Yeah.
Because he spends 18 months at Corinth, and during that time he sends this letter back up there. How to point to that? What was it?
That I don't know. I don't know what your point was, but it's early. There's a lot of persecution going on there too, and so we see that. We see persecution all throughout second missionary journey. Philippi, they're beaten. They're put in prison, and Thessalonica is no different. We see the Jews who basically are jealous. Not that, I think this too is, the Jews didn't have a problem rejecting Paul's message, but they didn't like it that these Gentiles were choosing this Jesus over the synagogue.
They're bypassing the Judaism.
Yeah, and they're like, whoa, you're tapping into our funds type deal.
Yeah.
That's essentially what's going on here is you're going to pull them away from God, because Judaism is still focused on God of Abraham and all that stuff. But you're going to go around us and talk about this Jesus, and they're not going to become Jews, and we don't like that. So we're going to go find some scoundrels in the marketplace, and the accusation against them is the same that they had in Philippi. They're trying to, proclaim a different king and cause these riots, which the whole Pax Romana thing is in place by this point, and so Peace of Rome, and so riots are not allowed. You get killed if you start a riot. That's what they're trying to get Paul and Silas. They're
Right.
like, if we
I know
can,
what it was. Thanks for stalling for me.
yeah, no problem.
So in
Just
First
talking about
Thessalonians,
random
he
things.
talks a lot about, we didn't take things from you. We just came and gave to you. And he talks about working with you. So he's building tents.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about tent making ministry, where you have to do a job to support your work of sharing the gospel. And so that's what Paul's doing here. He's building tents. They're not tents like probably that you go camping in tents. They're working with canvas.
He actually started the Coleman tent
Yes, that's Paul, the original founder of Coleman Tents.
camping gear of all sorts.
He's working on
Really expanded.
Really
actually
blew up.
stagecoach. Stagecoach camp. No, wait, that couldn't be right.
Oh, no.
So he's working on tents. But he's sharing the gospel then too. With, and opportunities come up. So he lives there amongst them. Who knows for how long? I don't think a long time, but long enough to share and make a difference. Then he travels on. This supporting them financially, like the Philippians do, probably doesn't happen until they get down to Corinth, and they've located for a while, and that begins to trickle down and then trickle over to Jerusalem.
Thessalonica would have been a pretty wealthy church, though, because we see that, like, just as a commerce,
It's a wealthy community.
yeah, and the whole prominent women thing gives us insight into the church structure there a little bit. And so,
I didn't. I felt like though when we were there, it was anything but wealthy. Now I know there probably were nice sections that we didn't go to, but where we walked when we went from the old place down to the round church, the
Yeah.
rotunda, and then the Roman arch that we went to, I'm glad it was daylight. Like it was sketchy. I
well,
know
you
Greeks-
picked the route. That was,
Google pick the route.
it was a little sketchy, but I felt pretty confident with my
Ben
Panama
Farley
hat
was
on.
with us back then.
Yeah.
So remember him?
Who?
Ben Farley.
Never
He
heard
picked-
of her.
He picked.
Easy,
He
easy.
picked the route for us because that's what he does. He's a navigator.
He is.
But it was like there were everything was graffitied,
Oh yeah.
which for my sensibilities, I hate graffiti.
Yeah.
Well, you talk about how like
Everything, everywhere was graffitied.
we also didn't. I don't know what the current church feel is there, but you think about
There aren't any.
the truth being proclaimed and then rejected, and then that's what we have thousands of years later.
So
I heard some guy in a video recite a statistic that today less than 3% of the people actually go.
yeah,
That was you.
that was me. So
Bunker's like, that guy's a genius.
he's brilliant. Okay. So it was
Made that
like
up.
there's a super high percentage of Greek Orthodox.
Yeah, it's really
they
high.
don't go.
But practicing actually, and I think the 3% was Orthodox and evangelical Christians
It was,
is less
yeah.
than 3%.
Right.
Even though by culture standards it's like 90% Greek Orthodox or
That's
something
where
like
we're
that.
at culturally, though. 90% believe in God, but
Yeah.
nobody
And
shows it.
here's the difference. We're talking about Jason's house, which there's lots of things that I would love to expand upon this. One, the church is in homes for the first 300 years, and this is the practice, like not buildings. So that's a whole tangent I could go on. But the accusation that these men are causing a ruckus all over, or causing an uproar all over the world. So think about this. Paul's on his second city on this missionary journey, and he's already getting a reputation of this is flipping the world upside down.
That's awesome.
Yeah, like what an encouragement. Like for Paul, I'm thinking he's like, sweet, like this is awesome.
We had a call.
I knew you were going to go
last
this
week.
way.
I loved it. Somebody called from the neighborhood and
not
were
watching this
complaining that we were
podcast.
causing too much traffic. I went, yeah.
Yeah.
The neighborhood's noticing the church has too much traffic.
But then you have
It's a little different. I
that's
mean, I think
it's
upside
a little
down is a little more dramatic than too
yeah.
much traffic.
Turning the neighborhood upside down.
But then you have Jason and
Can we know
Williams.
he's mentioned? We know this dude's legit. He's mentioned in Romans
Yeah.
16.
Yeah.
Yep.
And here's the thing. A lot of times I feel I go back and forth on this because you read stories like this. This dude's a Christian for like 3 weeks.
Yeah,
And he is
all in.
he's all in. He's like, yeah, like so what is Paul preaching there? This gospel is going to cost you everything. It's worth it, but it's going to cost you everything. And Jason is mentioned here that he's hosting Paul and Silas, knowing the consequences from what just happened in Philippi. He's proclaiming, Paul and Silas proclaiming this gospel, this new Jesus thing to them. And he's like, I'm in, whatever it takes. And he is. Like, he's drug out of his house for hiding them, and he's made to post bond. Usually bond is so, like, you show up to a court thing. This bond is make sure they don't come back in. And, and it's just this idea of, man, what are we proclaiming? When we tell people about Jesus, are we really giving them the gospel of, like, hey, if you're going to follow Jesus, it means all of life. Not, like, some of your life, a piece of your life. It's all of life. And that's where Jason's at. 3 weeks in, he's willing to take whatever consequences.
It's the Holy Spirit here.
Yeah.
God is transforming people's hearts. Because, like you're saying, they don't know much. I mean, they know the backstory, maybe, but they don't.
We don't even know if Jason's Jewish or not.
We know, but he's all in.
That's what we know. Yeah. And so you better believe, like, Paul is telling, because First Thessalonians then is all about, like, stand firm. Like, you know the persecution that has come as a result of the gospel. Stand firm in this. Like, Persevere on. And this is going to be a message from the second missionary journey all the way to Revelation, is don't give in to the culture around you. Yes, it's going to be tough to be a follower of Jesus, but it's worth it. And that's the message that begins to really like solidify the church. It galvanizes their faith. They get really strong in the faith. So whenever we talk about modern day Thessaloniki, we've lost that in some way, shape, or form. And man, you mentioned the United States and Western churches, like we're headed there. Of the gospel is a piece of our life. This following Jesus and God is a piece of our life that directs moral behavior, but is it really all of our life that matters for every decision?
The vice president said last couple of days ago, because there was controversy over being pro-abortion and a devout Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, your faith has nothing to do with your stance on abortion.
Yeah, that's not true.
That's just not true. It's not true.
It affects everything.
It is when your faith is just a cultural ideology.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But if it's real and it's in Jesus, that's just not true. Your faith affects everything.
Yeah.
She's wrong.
And it goes back to what we've been talking about. At some point, you have to be able to be willing to stand up and disagree and be willing to take the consequence. And
it's coming.
Yeah.
It's coming hard. Yeah. And I don't know. It's it's really hard to go from cushy to difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Jason knew nothing but difficult.
Well, his life wasn't bad before start.
Right,
he probably would have just been chilling.
If he's going to follow Jesus, it's going to be tough.
Yep.
And so when he jumps all in, it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
Whereas we're in a culture that's drifting from it's okay to be in this cushy, I believe,
comfort. Yeah.
To do you really?
Mm-hmm.
It's a tough transition. I'm afraid a lot of people fall by the wayside when you make that switch.
I do too.
It's kind of like when the crowds followed Jesus and Jesus said, "Hey, you're just here for a free lunch."
It's kind of like when you say, "Oh, we're not meeting for 3 months." You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, it weeds out people fast.
Yeah. Good news. Stand firm.
It's worth it.
It's worth it. It's worth it. Thanks for joining us on the ReThink podcast.